The silence of the morning is not broken by a sound, but by a vibration that travels through the marrow of the bone before it ever reaches the ear. High above, the sky splits into shades of bruised purple and jagged crimson. Then comes the roar. It is a sound so massive it ceases to be noise and becomes a physical force, a wall of pressure that flattens forests in a heartbeat. At the center of this chaos, the earth does not just shake, it liquefies. A massive column of fire and pulverized rock surges upward, tearing through the clouds and punching a hole into the stratosphere, casting a shadow that threatens to swallow the sun. This is the beginning of the end for the landscape as we know it. To understand a disaster of this magnitude, one must look beyond the immediate destruction and focus on the mechanics of the collapse. Geologists often refer to the point of origin as ground zero, or point G0. It is the place where the laws of nature seem to suspend themselves in favor of raw, unbridled energy. The energy released at such a point is often measured in megatons of TNT, equivalent to thousands of atomic bombs detonating in a synchronized sequence deep beneath the crust. The sequence of events leading to this catastrophic failure begins kilometers underground. For centuries, tectonic plates have been locked in a silent, high-stakes struggle. Pressure builds as molten rock seeks an escape route through the brittle layers of the lithosphere. When the breaking point is reached, the failure is instantaneous. The crust snaps. In the first few seconds, the ground at the epicenter undergoes a process of displacement so violent that entire mountains can be displaced by several meters. As the collapse deepens, the auditory experience becomes a defining feature of the event. The sound waves generated at point G0 are low-frequency infrasound, capable of traveling across entire oceans. People living 3,000 miles away might hear a faint rhythmic thumping, like a giant beating a drum beneath the sea. Closer to the site, the sound is a continuous, soul-crushing scream of tearing metal and grinding stone. It is the sound of the planet rearranging itself. The pillar of fire mentioned in historical and scientific accounts is actually a mixture of superheated gases, ash, and incandescent lava. As the pressure is released, this material is ejected at supersonic speeds. The heat at the core of this column is intense enough to melt sand into glass instantly. As this plume ascends, it interacts with the cold air of the upper atmosphere, creating its own weather system. Lightning bolts, miles long, dance within the ash cloud, triggered by the static friction of billions of particles colliding in the turbulence. From a third-person perspective, observing this from a safe distance, the scale is impossible to grasp. The horizon seems to rise up to meet the sky. The sheer volume of material being displaced creates a vacuum effect, drawing in surrounding air and creating localized hurricane-force winds that blow toward the center of the destruction. This is the paradox of point G0. It is both an explosion and a collapse, a simultaneous outward burst of energy and an inward surrender of the Earth's structure. The environmental aftermath begins almost immediately. The sky turns a permanent shade of gray as the sun is blotted out by the sheer density of the particulate matter. This is not the dust of a common fire. This is the pulverized remains of the deep Earth. It is heavy, acidic, and relentless. It begins to fall like a gray, suffocating snow, coating everything for hundreds of miles. The temperature drops as the solar radiation is reflected back into space, signaling the start of a localized or even global cooling event. In the hours following the initial eruption or collapse, the landscape is unrecognizable. Rivers are dammed by debris, and the topography is flattened or thrust upward into new, jagged formations. The silence that follows is even more haunting than the roar that preceded it. It is a heavy, ash-muted silence where the only sound is the settling of rubble and the distant hiss of escaping steam. The study of these events is crucial for the survival of civilization. By analyzing the seismic signatures and the chemical composition of the ash, scientists can piece together the history of our planet's most violent cycles. Point G0 is not just a place of destruction, it is a laboratory of extreme physics. It reminds us that the ground we walk upon is merely a thin, fragile crust floating atop a restless and powerful engine. Ultimately, the story of the Earth breaking apart is a story of transformation. Out of the total devastation of the epicenter, new land is eventually formed. The minerals brought up from the deep will one day fertilize new forests. But for those witnessing the moment the Earth shatters, there is only the awe-inspiring power of a world in flux. The fire in the stratosphere eventually fades, the ground stops its violent trembling, and the long process of healing and tectonic realignment begins. The memory of the roar, however, remains etched into the very stones of the new landscape, a reminder of the day the Earth spoke in a voice of fire and thunder.